Greetings and salutations one and all. Welcome to the night shift of DJ Kevin Stew. It's the end of the night shift week. It's the show we call Real Talk Wednesdays. How are you doing, one and all? Glad to have you. Couldn't do it without you. You have my word. I wouldn't even try. Big ups to those on kevinstew.com, on TuneIn Radio, the night shift of DJ Kevin Stew, those on PEMGTV.com. Glad to have each and every one of you. Call a friend, tell a friend. It's Real Talk right here on the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew. Happy hump day to you all. Cooking it up a little bit with voice and wuss ways. It's called Pandemonium.
All them years of my life that I'm playing mass. Oh, I never see this. Only one thinking I they in charge of job. I never see this. It's rock there, it's hands there, it's oil there, it's gal there, it's mass there. Watch out everybody, I'll get somebody. Lord, it look like pandemonium. Have somebody to this stadium. Boy, do this a shine now. We on the line now. When is we time now? Lord, it look like pandemonium. Let me put it on the bottom now. Start to run now. Start to run now. Start to run now. Throw everything up in the air, in the air, in the air. Throw your rock up everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Swing everything up in the air, in the air, in the air. Put your rock up in the air, in the air, in the air. It's a riot in the air, oh Lord. Man, I hope they go take this. It's a riot in the air, oh Lord. Let's really be making. Yeah, the whole place turn up, yeah, it burn up. It's like fire under we feet. Everybody start jump up, wave up, hey. You and the whole team lead, hey. And if I'm work and just so end up in the mass. I never see this. Long chain dragging, nobody's full of oil. I never see this. It's Chavleo, it's Hansdale, it's Oileo, it's Galdeo, it's Marcelo. Watch out everybody, I'll get somebody. Lord, it look like pandemonium. Come somebody to this stadium. Boy, do this a shine now. We on the line now. When is we time now? Lord, it look like pandemonium. Let me put it on the bottom now. Start to run now. Start to run now. Start to run now. Throw everything up in the air, in the air, in the air. Throw your rock up everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Swing everything up in the air, in the air, in the air. Put your rock up in the air, in the air, in the air. It's a riot in the air, oh Lord. Man, I hope they go take this. It's a riot in the air, oh Lord. Let's really be making. Yeah, the whole place turn up, yeah, it burn up.
The whole place turn up. It's called Pandemonium. The sound of voice and wuss ways.
I never see this. Long chain dragging.
I want to say thanks to Pulse Media Group for sponsoring this segment of the show. When being in a moment is priceless, give them a call, 754-999-6020. What can they do for you? Everything you see right here on kevinstew.com. They can host your website. They can create a website if you don't already have one. They can provide streaming services for you on your website, just like you see right here on kevinstew.com. Innovative streaming and recording solutions for you. Call them 754-999-6020 or visit them at pulseemg.com. If you want to take that step further and have your own internet broadcasting station, they can hook you up with that too. I want to say thanks to Althea and her healing heavenly hands. Althea Esu is a licensed massage therapist that comes to you, operating out of Broad County, North Miami-Dade and South Palm Beach counties. The only tricky thing right now is that Althea can't really come to you all at this time. Some of you might get lucky. Give her a call still. 954-655-9000. That's the number to connect with her, or you can get to her at thealater@att.net. So if you're in Broward County or traveling to South Florida, Broward, North Miami-Dade, South Palm Beach counties, that's a good number to have. Big ups to Reggae Global Entertainment. They provide excellent marketing and promotion. But not only that, they can be a booking agency, take care of your tour management, do your social media management and marketing, copyrights, book publishing, trademarks, business registrations, music production. Just give them a call, 954-998-8034, or visit them at reggaeglobalentertainment.com. And of course, GMAT Music Solutions. They normally take care of our musical therapy segment, bringing your event to life, giving you stage production services, light and sound, musical equipment, audio engineers, DJs, bands, musicians, singers, PA systems. Give them a call, 754-307-GMAC. That's 754-307-4622. Or you can visit them at gmatmusicsolutions.com, and you can also do your online shopping there. But this segment belongs to Pulse Media Group. Thank you, PEMG TV and Pulse Media Group. And someone who I have a feeling is no stranger to a little bit of pandemonium, not a whole lot. Right, David? Just a little bit of pandemonium.
I think that's true. Actually, Kevin, I'm mostly concerned these days with trying to prevent pandemonium.
You're trying to prevent it.
I'm familiar with it, which is why I'm so concerned with preventing it.
Oh, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this man you see beside me, those of you watching on the home of the Night Shift to DJ Kevin Stew, kevinstew.com. And if you're watching on PEMG TV, also this man that you see right here beside me, on that side, that side. You know, I get turned around when I look at this thing sometimes. So on that side of me, this guy it's his show tonight. He doesn't know it yet, but we'll make him aware of it in just a moment. It's his show tonight, and he goes by the name David. Sometimes he answers to it. I don't think he goes by it all the time, but for most times he answers to it. David P. Barash, and occasionally he gets formal and goes with the doctor. But for the sake of tonight's show, it's David, and I introduced you, my loyal listeners, to David P. Barash.
Hello, everybody, and hello, Kevin. So let me say that what I have for you,
yes,
with your help, Kevin, I have a special treat for your listeners, those who are bummed out by bad news like global warming and the current pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you something much more cheerful and happy to think about. Nuclear war. Nuclear war. That would be a great relief, great change of pace, don't you think?
This guy. Yeah, actually, yes, it would. We haven't heard anything nuclear lately. And I think it would be quite the change of pace.
Well, it'll be that. And I think the truth is we ought to have heard a great deal about issues related to nuclear war, but for a variety of reasons, we haven't been lately. And we were for a while when Mr. Trump seemed to be very close to engaging in a nuclear war with North Korea. Fortunately, that seems to have calmed down somewhat. But I think in general, the American people have been lulled into a really dangerous false sense of security.
Right.
There are lots of problems in the world, but I would argue that the biggest problem is the one that hasn't happened yet. And that makes it hard for people to really worry about it. frankly. But if it did happen, and in my more pessimistic moods, I would say when it does happen, we won't be in a position to think about it anymore. So we damn well better prevent it now.
Yeah.
And actually, what I'm particularly agitated about lately, and I have a book coming out this fall with Oxford University Press that deals with threats generally, and
Yes.
about half of the book deals with nuclear deterrence and my critique of it, because I think it's a very, very, very bad and dangerous idea.
Well, and incidentally, the title, the topic that I have chosen for tonight's show is actually just that, deterrence. And, you know, if we could just backtrack just a little bit to look at what deterrence really is.
Sure. So deterrence, actually, the root of the word comes from the Latin meaning to frighten. And the idea, which is significant in itself, right?
Yeah.
The idea of deterrence, when it's applied to the military in particular, we can talk about it in other respects, too, with regard to criminology, the notion of deterring crime, ostensibly, by certain threats. Most seriously, the threat of capital punishment, supposedly to deter murder, which we now have a great deal of evidence that it does not.
It does not, no.
It does not. But in any case, let's talk about the deterrence in the military sense. And the idea is really very simple. It is essentially threat, the idea that a given country, whoever it is relying on deterrence, will prevent another country from doing something that they don't want the other country to do by virtue of some sort of threat. They will threaten, or they do threaten, that if the other side was to do something that they don't like, they would really regret it. Something really, really, really bad would happen to them. And if the threat is sufficiently intense and believable, and that's a really important component, then that will ideally, in theory at least, prevent the other side from doing whatever it is that the would-be deterrer is attempting to prevent. Yeah. Now, historically, by the way, Kevin, if I run off too much at the mouth, feel free, please, to interrupt.
To reel you in. Okay, I can do that.
Reel me in. Like a fish.
Right.
A troublesome fish. Okay. So historically, there have actually been, and even now to some extent, there's actually two forms of military deterrence. It's worth looking at this. There's deterrence by denial and deterrence by punishment. Now, the idea of deterrence by denial is that ideally you deter the other side by denying that side the opportunity to be successful. Really, the classic examples of deterrence by denial are things like military lines of fortification. I guess the really classic would be the Great Wall of China.
Right.
The idea being, you keep the barbarian hordes out by this big wall. And to some extent it worked. More recently, in the 20th century, there was the Maginot Line, which the French attempted, and that didn't work at all because the Germans just went around it. Nonetheless, the idea of deterrence by denial has a long history.
Yeah, and I guess that was what was trying to be put in place with the Mexico Wall.
That's right. The idea then there was to, on the part of our beloved president, was to deter...
Resident. He can leave off the P, the resident.
Right. To deter immigrants who are really more often refugees, from coming into the U.S. by denying them the opportunity of doing so. Now, we can talk forever about how ill-advised and downright stupid and immoral that is, but you're right, absolutely right. That would be an example of deterrence by denial.
Right.
Now, the major alternative, and the one that most people think about these days when they think about nuclear deterrence, is deterrence by punishment. And here the idea is you can't really stop the other side from doing whatever it is it's going to do, but you can't deny their success, perhaps, but you can threaten them with sufficient punishment that they
Would
ideally
reconsider.
won't do it in the first place.
Right.
And there are classic examples of that historically. The Roman Empire engaged mostly in deterrence by punishment. That empire was so big they didn't build a wall around the whole damn thing. They couldn't. So what they did was establish the policy that if any barbarian hordes, if you will, impinged on their sovereignty, they would eventually send out the Roman legions and punish them.
Right.
And that worked to some extent. Now, let's get to nuclear war. The idea of nuclear deterrence is not deterrence by denial. Much as people like to talk about so-called anti-ballistic missile systems and all that, the truth is they absolutely don't work. The results so far have been remarkably unsuccessful. There's no way to deny another side. If the other side wants to attack you with nuclear weapons, there's really no way to prevent them from doing so at the present, except by, in the mind of those who believe in deterrence, punishment. That is to say, we say, listen, you guys attack us, we're going to blow you all up.
Right.
We're going to punish you so badly that you won't do it in the first place. Now, there are some real problems here, and that's what much of my thinking is about these days, and I'd be happy to talk about it.
Sure.
Not least of which is that the punishment would punish the whole planet.
Right.
We're not just talking about a few bad guys who get slapped on the wrist. Okay. And one issue here, there are many issues, an important issue to look at is that deterrence is believed by many people to work. Many people say, look, it's been successful. What's wrong with that? We need to rely on it. We've been relying on it. We haven't had an all-out nuclear war. The last time nuclear weapons were used in anger was, of course, the bombing of Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. And so we haven't had a nuclear war with the Russians, and we can rely on nuclear weapons. We can attribute this to the presence of nuclear weapons. Well, first of all, I think that's an enormous misstatement. There's really no reason whatsoever to conclude that nuclear weapons, our threat of deterrence, has prevented a nuclear war with the Russians, among other things. Certainly if it had failed, we wouldn't be around to congratulate deterrence for it. So the only way we can attribute any success is because so far it hasn't failed, but as soon as it does fail, if it were to fail, that would be it. I wouldn't be able to say, I told you so, it wasn't going to work. Right. And those who believe in deterrence wouldn't be able to say, whoops, I'm sorry, I guess it failed. We attribute things often to actions that have no direct connection to whatever it is we're attributing them to. Let me give you some examples. There's a wonderful joke about the guy who goes outside on his lawn every day. Maybe that was before the COVID pandemic, he'd go outside and he'd spray perfume all over his lawn. Okay. And after a while, his neighbor came over and said, "Hey, dude, what are you doing? Why are you doing that?" And he says, "Well, I do it to keep the elephants away." And so the neighbor says, "What elephant? What are you talking about? There aren't any elephants within 10,000 miles of here." And the guy says,
"Then it must be working."
"See, it works." Yeah, exactly.
What?
And there are a number of phenomena like that. Let me give you one other, a real one now. In ancient China, people were very much afraid of solar eclipses. And it was widely believed that what caused the solar eclipse was when a dragon, dragons have always been important in China. Right. At least in their mythology. But a dragon was swallowing the sun. And so they would all get out when there was a solar eclipse. And they'd bang pots and yell and scream and make as much noise as they could to frighten the dragon and get him to vomit out the sun. Right. And so, guess what? It worked. It worked. Every time.
So the conformational bias.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so
Yes.
that confirmational bias says, wow, that's, look how successful we've been. Well, the truth is, um, neither you, Kevin, nor I have died yet, right?
Right.
Um,
As far
that
as I
doesn't
know.
mean we're not going to. And I sure as hell wouldn't take the fact that I haven't died yet as evidence for, and certainly not as proof of the fact that I'm not going to.
Right.
Um, and so, this is a big issue. Now let's look. Am I talking too much?
Oh
If
no, no.
so, I'll,
Not as I told you.
okay,
It was I told you. You
my
weren't
show.
aware of it yet, but this is your show.
You made
I'm
me
just
aware, yeah, just
facilitating.
now. All right. So let's look at a little history because we learn a lot from that. For those people who say, well, we haven't had a nuclear war since 1945, and we can attribute that to nuclear weapons. Well, there are many reasons why the U.S. and the Soviet Union and now Russia haven't had a war, not the least of which is we've had no adequate reason to have a war. I mean, the U.S. and the Soviet Union didn't have a war before 1945. Why should we say that it was only with nuclear weapons that we were able to prevent that war? Moreover, if you look at history a little further back, there have been long periods of peace, just like we say, well, there's been this nuclear peace, supposedly, since 1945 with Soviet Union and then Russia. Well,
Right.
there have been long periods of peace that happened that were then followed by war. I mean, the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the next major ended in 1815, and then the next major war in Europe was the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. So that was a long break. That was longer than since 1945.
Yeah,
Um,
that's quite a stretch.
yeah, and then after the Franco-Prussian War from 71 to World War I, that happened in 1914. And then after that, World War II happened in either 39 or 45 or whatever country you're in at the time. But once again, there are periods of peace followed by
Right.
war. So the fact that we haven't had a major World War III is not unusual in history. There are periods of peace, and to say, okay, we can say with confidence that that the presence of nuclear weapons, namely our threat to use them, has prevented war. Well, when wars have happened, and they always seem to, nations have used those weapons that they have at hand. I think enough said about that issue, perhaps.
I like the history lessons. Funny enough.
Yeah, well, I can go on. Let me give you a few more.
When I was in
you
high
know,
school, I didn't do history very well, but since then, I know it's a significant time since then. But I have this greater appreciation for history because now I'm learning more about where we're coming from, and I can recognize some of the things that are happening now that connect with then, and it gives me a little bit more sense of where I want to get to.
Yeah, I think that's very wise, Kevin, and absolutely true. It's unfortunate that often people have to become old farts like you and me, in order to have that perspective.
Well, with age comes wisdom. It's one
I
of
would
those
like
things.
to think so.
Yes, yes. So I borrowed that little bit of wisdom from some friends I have.
I like it. So look, let's look a little more at the notion that, okay, well, maybe we can't be confident that nuclear deterrence has prevented World War III, prevented, thermonuclear war.
Right.
But hasn't it at least, and a number of people will say this, hasn't it at least kept other countries from doing things, let's say, to us that we don't want them to do because we've got this big threat? Well, let's look at that a little bit. There was this huge crisis where we came pretty close to nuclear war, or to war, with the then Soviet Union in 1948. It was the so-called Berlin crisis.
Right.
We were really close then. Well, in 1948, we had nuclear weapons. The Soviets did not. They didn't develop them for a year or two later, and even then they only had a handful or fewer. And that didn't stop Stalin from threatening the U.S. and really being willing, as far as we could tell, to go to conventional war. We had nuclear weapons. They didn't. It didn't inhibit him at all. Look at China. Just a couple of years later, China entered the Korean War in 1950 out of fear, actually, that the U.S. forces, officially UN forces, but they were overwhelmingly U.S. forces, under MacArthur, had reversed the North Korean successes, and the Chinese honestly thought that maybe MacArthur was going to keep on going beyond the Yalu River and try to retake Beijing, essentially, and undo the Chinese Communist Revolution. That was just a year after that, which had happened in 1949. So 1950, however, despite the fact that China did not have nuclear weapons, we had hundreds of them. And this was 14 years before China developed nuclear weapons. They sent almost 500,000 Chinese soldiers against the U.S. in Korea. So our having nuclear weapons didn't deter them.
Not at all.
Not in the least. And let me give you just two more examples of that, since you like history, and I think, again, we learned from it. I absolutely agree with you. The Falkland Islands. Now, Argentina was at 82. Argentina decided they were going to take back the Falkland Islands from Great Britain. Well, Argentina did not have nuclear weapons. Great Britain did, but the fact that Britain had nuclear weapons didn't exactly deter Argentina. They had a little war, and Argentina got its behind kicked. The English didn't use nuclear weapons. Wouldn't have done them any good anyhow. But as sure as hell didn't deter the Argentinians, the fact that they didn't have them.
Right.
And I'll give you one last example so I don't just sort of beat this dead horse too much. Not that long ago, during the first Iraq War, the first Gulf War, when the Iraqis, Saddam in particular, was really upset with what was going on, he sent 39 Scud missiles flying to Israel. Now, these were, of course, conventionally armed missiles. He didn't have nuclear weapons, despite what Mr. W. claimed at the time.
Right.
Israel had lots of nuclear weapons, had over 100. That didn't prevent the Iraqis from essentially bombarding Israel with their own missiles. And Israel didn't do a damn thing because, they could have obliterated Baghdad, but what the hell good would that have done them? So again, having nuclear weapons, as Israel did, didn't help them against Iraq. Having nuclear weapons like the British didn't help them against Argentina. Having nuclear weapons like we did and the Russians didn't in 1948 didn't help us. They didn't help us against China. One could go on. They didn't help us in another sense. It didn't help the U.S. in Vietnam. It didn't help us in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Russia lost its satellites, its Eastern European satellites. They didn't help. What didn't help them in Afghanistan either, having nuclear weapons. So the point I'm trying to make, and I'll stop with this point, is that all this claim that deterrence does a country so much good, nuclear deterrence, by threatening the other side, don't do what we don't want you to do or else you're in big trouble.
Right.
That has not worked at all. And yet the myth persists that having nuclear weapons helps you get your way in the world.
Yeah, that's right. And here it is. One of our listeners, one of our regular listeners, big ups to you, Marlon, host of Real Rockers, reggae music edutainer extraordinaire. Listen, you got to check this guy out, David.
Okay.
But he says the presence of nuclear weapons didn't stop the desert wars. And he put that in the stew pot just as you were saying it, or just before you said it, and so true. Yeah, absolutely. And yet, again, the myth persists. Lots of people say, oh my gosh, we really need nuclear deterrence because otherwise other countries are going to walk all over us. Yeah.
Well, what prevents other countries from walking all over us may have something to do with our military, but it sure as hell isn't our nuclear weapons. Because, again, that just hasn't done it. Now, if it's okay, I'd like to get to a whole other series of issues dealing with the problems of deterrence. And one of the huge problems, and there are many, is the problem of credibility. This is a big part of the reason why having nuclear weapons hasn't helped those countries that have them or had them in the past from profiting from them. The big problem with nuclear weapons is credibility because the threat to use them lacks credibility.
Mm?
Reason it lacks credibility is because it's like it's more than trying to kill a fly with a sledgehammer. It's more like trying to, imagine a policeman armed with a backpack nuclear weapon
Right.
who's standing outside a bank, and the robber comes, okay? And the policeman says, stop, and the robber says, or you'll what? And the policeman says, I'll blow us all up, you
Right.
and me and the bank and the whole city. Well, if I was a robber, I'm
gonna continue.
a robber. I wouldn't believe that for a minute.
I'm going to continue for real because okay, so you blow us all up. I'm not gonna get arrested.
I'm not going to get arrested. Also,
And
I
you're
don't
not
believe you're going to do that.
And you're not
That's a
gonna
crazy
arrest me.
threat.
So
Yeah, you're right. You certainly wouldn't. If you were going to threaten to arrest me, and not put your knee on my neck, let's say, if you were going to just arrest me, well, and you had others around with you, I might believe that threat.
right.
Let me give you another more. Again, it's another fanciful example. Imagine your child isn't eating her peas for dinner, and you say, "All right, honey, eat your peas or else." And she says, or else what, Dad? And you say, well, or else I'm going to blow up the house.
Yeah.
Well, again, that wouldn't have a lot of credibility. You could go ahead and increase the credibility, I suppose. You could plant sticks of dynamite all over the house and run a wire up to a plunger right in the kitchen there.
Mm-hmm.
And that would maybe have a little more credibility, but I don't think that'd be a great way to try to get your kid to eat your peas. More realistic would be to say, well, eat your peas. First of all, it's good for you, blah, blah, blah. And maybe if you don't, you won't get any screen time tonight or something, a little more reasonable. And so that's a big problem with credibility. And part of the problem of credibility, in turn, is that it has driven both sides, or all sides, particularly the United States, actually, because we've driven most of the nuclear arms issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's driven us to develop nuclear weapons that are more credible, that are more likely to be believed that we might use them. And what we're talking about here are smaller, so-called tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. Okay?
Right.
Now, the U.S. and NATO, long time, was, and to some extent even now, saying they were going to defend Western Europe by the use of nuclear weapons. Well, there was one NATO general, actually, who said, we have a problem here. The towns in Germany, because were there an invasion, say, from the Soviet Union and now Russia into Germany, most of the battlefield initially would be in Germany. But, one problem we got is that the towns are only 2 kilotons apart. And what he was trying to say is, you try to defend Germany with nuclear weapons, you blow up the whole country.
Exactly.
So it's not believable unless you develop nice little ones that are more usable. Well, now there's a really deep and disturbing paradox here. The way then to enhance the credibility of nuclear deterrence is, among other things, not the only way, there are some other really dangerous ways too, but one of them for sure is to develop weapons that are themselves more usable and hence more credible. But the big paradox is the only way you can have weapons that are more usable is by making them more usable, which is to say more liable to be used.
Right.
And so we are hanging ourselves by our own noose, as is anyone else who's trying to increase the use of the credibility of nuclear weapons by making them more usable. Because the whole idea is that they're supposed to not be used. So, all this stuff about, and so limited nuclear wars, small little tactical nuclear weapons, all this stuff, trying to make them credible makes them more dangerous yet. Makes it more dangerous yet that they're going to be used. So that's
we're looking
one
at
big problem.
much ado about nothing when you really think about it.
Well, I think it's much ado about a lot, though. I agree with you, because you say, well, because credibility is so low, maybe you don't have to worry about it. But
Right.
unfortunately, I wish that were true, Kevin. There are some real problems, unfortunately, despite the fact that they lack credibility. One of them, and there are a whole bunch, again, we can talk for hours about it, but one of them is the problem of false alarms.
Mm.
So even though it lacks credibility, the truth is there's a history of hundreds of false alarms, hundreds of circumstances in which the United States has believed for a period of time that we were under attack. Now, as far as we know, something like that happened in the Soviet Union too, and even in Russia now. But they're very closed about it. They play those issues very close to their chest. So we know virtually nothing about their false alarms. But
Right.
it's almost certainly true that their computer systems are not as good as ours. So I mean, all sorts of weird things have happened. In one case, there was a nuclear war games tape that was wrongly inserted into a computer and was read as a real attack. Okay, this is a war games tape.
Mm.
Other cases, flocks of geese have been interpreted as missile attacks.
Wow.
In other cases, radar signals that bouncing off the rising moon have been interpreted as an attack. And there have been a huge number of these. So even though it's not credible, the problem is, what do you do if you're a national leader and you get this report and you're told, listen, Mr. or Ms. President, we have every reason to think we're under attack, and you got 5 minutes to retaliate. Well, so far, it's been discovered, short of that it's a false alarm. But, I mean, you can imagine, I can imagine a tightrope walker, a really good tightrope walker,
Mm-hmm.
maybe balancing on a rope for 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. But for decades, I mean, for hundreds of years without ever falling off, without a false alarm ever actually being interpreted as a real attack, that really, again, talk about credibility.
Right.
That's taking a huge chance. So that's one issue. I'll give you another one. Why? And then your point's a good one. Given the lack of credibility, you think, wow, in that case, the whole thing is much ado about nothing. Another thing that deterrence relies upon is rationality. Right? I mean, the whole thing is based on the notion of, well, sure, they're not going to attack us because they know that if they did, we would retaliate against them and blow them the hell up. And so no rational person would make this kind of attack. Well, no rational person, perhaps. But what happens when the person is not 100% rational?
Yeah.
I mean, don't tell me that everybody's rational. And nobody ever just gets really pissed off or acts out of stubbornness or pique, P-I-Q-U-E,
Mm-hmm.
or vindictiveness. Now, the guy we currently have in the White House is not exactly a paragon of rationality and clear.
But there are fail-safes in place to prevent any one such person from doing that. Well, that's what we're told anyway.
Well, no, there aren't. There are no fail-safes in place. In fact, at this moment in time, and we're assuming that's true in Russia and in China, for instance, we don't know for sure, nor do we know what the deal is in India or Pakistan or Israel. At this point, one person, in our case, the President of the United States, has the sole authority for ordering the launching of nuclear weapons. And he does not have to do it in response to the U.S. being attacked. He could do it for any damn reason he chooses.
Just
And
because it's Tuesday.
Right. Because I woke up on the wrong side of the bed and I'm really irritated. And nobody loves me. And I'm going to lose the next election anyhow, so I may as well blow up the whole damn world. I mean, who knows what might be going on?
Wow.
There is no legal basis for countermanding that order. The Secretary of Defense isn't even in the system for that. the president has these so-called launch codes, and he could do it any time he wants, and no one is able to stop him. Now, that's a pretty bad system, don't you think?
Yeah.
It doesn't help me sleep at night when I think about that.
Yeah, that's a little bit concerning.
Well, yeah.
So
That might be the understatement of the day, my friend.
So if the president of the United States, or in this case, current resident of the White House, has that kind of power, then other countries with nuclear weapons that are not aligned with the United States, they have pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, as far as we know, they do. I have very little doubt that North Korea, there's absolutely no one who could countermand what Kim Jong-un would order.
Right.
He orders it, it's going to happen. He's got everyone so scared of him.
Right.
I don't know what the legalities are there. It probably doesn't matter. Other countries are probably in the same situation. And it's interesting because in the U.S., of course, we're supposed to have, the Congress is supposed to be involved in any declarations of war. But that, the last time we declared war was in 1941.
And that's what I was alluding to when I was saying, hey, aren't there fail safes in place? And Congress, I was thinking, would have been that pretty much that fail safe. To say that one person has
absolutely not.
No.
Yep.
Okay.
They are not. In fact, there has been legislation introduced by a congressperson from California, either California or Oregon, I can't remember now, named Ted Lieu, and by Edward Markey from the senator from Massachusetts, requiring that the president should not have sole authority.
Right.
But the Republican Senate has refused to go along with it. At this point, the president has sole authority. Indeed, the president can do it, like I said, even when we're not being attacked. In theory, originally, there was a reason for this. I think it's a bad reason, but it's a reason. The reason is if we are attacked by, say, the Soviet Union or the Russians with missiles that may take just a matter of minutes before they reach us, once the news is out, once the word is out, once we know we're under attack, we got to be able to retaliate right away, or else it'll be too late. Well, you got to ask, among other things, too late for what? I mean, what the hell good is it going to do us if we're about to get destroyed anyhow, to destroy them too, other than a kind of a post-mortem vindictiveness? But the argument for deterrence says, well, the other side has to believe that we will retaliate right away, even if maybe we wouldn't. The other side's got to believe we would retaliate to prevent them from attacking in the first place. That's the idea of deterrence.
Right.
Okay. And so in order to preserve that idea of deterrence, it was felt necessary that you've got to have the ability to order a nuclear strike right away. You can't go to Congress when it's a matter of minutes. You've got to have one dude who makes up his mind. And so that was the reason for that whole thing, and it hasn't changed. The reason is still there.
Well, I guess when you put it that way, it makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. But then if you look at the consequences of it, you look at what that means, namely that, the notion of the sword of Damocles, and the story that, I forget how it worked. Now that I said it, I'm not sure I remember it all. But it's sort of a Greek myth that the king Damocles was, he did something or other, and he had this sword hanging over his head, held by just one thread.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we got. There's this nuclear sword of Damocles. And as you said, it makes a kind of sense once you accept the whole issue of the presence of nuclear weapons. Then a lot of this irrationality becomes, in a sense, understandable. It doesn't make it any more acceptable, but it does make it make a kind of sense. Let me go on, by the way, because there's more issues. There are more problems yet. You think that's enough problems?
Oh,
There are a whole bunch more.
I'm gonna let you go on. I'm gonna say goodbye to Facebook Live first, though.
Okay.
Thank you guys over there on Facebook Live. You can continue with us on kevinstew.com. Like I say every night, I only come on here to remind you guys that kevinstew.com still exists. And that's where the whole show happens. So come on over, jump in the stew pot. It's where we keep things interactive and bubbling. Others call it a chat room. We're fancy. We call it the stew pot. So come on in, join the rest of the crew. It's a judgment-free zone. Your comments are welcomed. And in fact, they're invited. So we speak freely here. And we just ask that you keep it clean. But it's a judgment-free zone at the end of the day, and it's all about having having enlightenment and acceptance through enlightenment, to be specific. And boy, are we getting enlightened tonight! So, Facebook Live, deuces, and we continue right here at kevinstew.com. Right. So, David. You have more.
Yes, sir.
You have more.
Yeah.
Before you get to the more, really quickly. Actually, I'll do it at the end. We'll do it at the end. Give us the more.
I got to. Well, let me just go back to your expression, which I like, about enlightenment leading to acceptance. But I think when it comes to nuclear deterrence,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to promote the idea that enlightenment should lead to resistance. The more we know about this stuff, the more we should resist it.
Right.
And also, to go on, it does, one of the things that's happened, I've been immersed in this stuff for decades, and part of me is sort of mathematically comfortable. I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you. And a lot of the stuff that goes on with these nuclear strategists involve elaborate, what are called game theory models. I wrote a whole book about game theory in part because I felt a lot of people just need to understand what it's really about. And a lot of these models dealing with nuclear strategy get very mathematical. They look really fancy, and they scare people, not just because of nuclear war, but they scare people because of the mathematics. And people think, oh my gosh, I can't deal with this. It's not my thing. It's too complicated for me. Well, the truth is, nuclear deterrence is not nearly as fancy as it sounds. It's so basic that anyone can understand it. We can cut right through. I'm not talking about any mathematical equations. I could, but I'm not going to, because you don't need it. You don't need it at all. It's really logical, and indeed, the problems are logical. It's illogical. That's the real problem. So let me go on a few. I think we talked some about some of the illogic. Let me go on here. One of the important developments in the last few decades in nuclear deterrence strategy has been what's called counterforce.
Okay.
Now, all that counterforce means is aiming your weapons at the weapons of the other guy. It used to be that we would engage in what's called counter-value, which was aiming our weapons at the cities of the other guy.
Right.
And they would aim them at the cities. Okay?
Right. So I thought that was how it continued.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's been around for a long time, and it led to the acronym Mutually Assured Destruction, MAD, or MAD.
Mm-hmm.
MAD, which is a good acronym for it.
It is.
But a lot of people thought, well, that probably wouldn't have credibility, because why would we respond to an attack by destroying their cities? That doesn't make sense. It's also immoral, of course. And so instead of aiming at their cities, let's aim at their weapons instead. Let's aim our missiles at their missiles. That actually fits with a whole long-standing military strategy, which says military attitude. And there is some ethics to the military, actually, which is, among other things, you attack the other armies. You attack the soldiers, the Navy, whatever. You don't attack innocent women, men, women, and children, and dogs, and cats. You attack the other armed forces.
Right.
And so that's part of what Counterforce was about. So, and originally we couldn't do that because our weapons, our missiles weren't sufficiently accurate. It doesn't take a lot of accuracy to aim a missile at Moscow. But if you're going to aim it at a hardened missile silo that's got, many meters of reinforced concrete above it, you got to hit the thing pretty much straight on or close to it.
You got to catch the sweet spot.
What's that? Yeah.
You got to get the sweet spot. Yeah.
There you go. So with increasing accuracy, we've been able then to satisfy the military's desire for counterforce targeting, which seems like it's more moral, and according to some people, helps deterrence because has more credibility. Okay. Now we got a big problem though, which is the whole idea of deterrence is that it's going to prevent the other side from attacking you because of fear that you're going to retaliate against them. When you develop the ability, as we're rapidly developing now, to target the weapons of the other side, from the perspective of the other side, this looks an awful lot like you're planning what's called a first strike. Because if you could be attacked, let's say you're the Russians, if you could be attacked and have your weapons all wiped out, what's to stop the United States from doing it, especially during some time of international crisis?
Right, so it is perceived as an act of aggression.
Exactly. It's perceived as an act of aggression. And so under times of, normally you say, well, why would the other side? The other side's not going to be aggressive out of nowhere. But let's imagine there's a real situation of crisis, and each side is getting more and more nervous and kind of trigger happy. The other side might attack me. Well, you say, no, they're not going to attack me because if they do, I'll be able to retaliate and destroy them. That's deterrence. Well, but if the would-be attacker has, in theory, the ability to attack you and get rid of your missiles, then it could, again, in theory, attack you and you wouldn't be able to retaliate.
Right.
And so what that does is undermines deterrence. So what does that do then? Well, what it would do to a side that's getting nervous is say, well, wait a minute, they may attack us any minute now, and they could destroy our weapons, which would make it even more feasible for them to do it. And so, you know what? We better attack them before they attack us. And then, of course, the other side, the first side, says, we could attack their missiles. Well, we're not going to. We're not immoral and all that. We're not going to do it. But you know what? We're saying, hey, the hawks on that side, they're probably getting nervous, and they may be about to preempt our attack. So you know what? We ought to preempt their preemption. And then the other side says, well, we ought to preempt their preemption of our preemption. And so, I'm laughing with tears in my eyes.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, but it's scary at the same time. For real, though.
It sure as hell is, yeah. Because the whole idea, in theory, is that deterrence is supposed to lead to what they call strategic stability, which means it reduces the chance of anyone striking first. Well, when you start doing what we're doing with this counterforce stuff, both sides are doing it, you undermine stability. You cause instability, where each side may worry the other one's going to strike first, so we better strike first before they do. And this bounces back and forth. Again, the whole idea of counterforce, it sounds so good. No, that doesn't sound great, but it sounds better than countervalue, threatening the cities. You know what? It has the image, gives me the image of a nuclear-armed Lone Ranger. I don't know if you're old enough, Kevin, to have watched the original Lone Ranger TV shows.
I won't admit it, but yes.
All right. Well, the Lone Ranger, he was the quintessential good guy.
Right.
He never killed anybody, right? Never. They would shoot. He'd shoot at the bad guy. The bad guy would pull his gun first, always. Lone Ranger wouldn't start.
Right.
The bad guy would take his gun out of his holster, and the Lone Ranger would shoot the
And
gun
shoot his
out
gun.
of his hand.
Yeah.
Right. And the guy would go, oh, he wouldn't even get hurt. You just dropped the gun. So that's the idea. It's like a nuclear Lone Ranger. We're going to disarm the other guy. And we'd be moral and ethical in the process. But the truth is what you're doing is causing a degree of instability here that is, I think, really grossly unacceptable. And part of it, again, is directly what you just said earlier, which is it raises the problem of distinguishing deterrence from offensive plans.
Right.
Deterrence is supposed to be defensive. It's supposed to say, you better not attack me, because if you do, I'm going to retaliate, so you're not going to attack me in the first place. But the truth is, as we keep piling on these weapons, it looks to the other side like maybe it's not just a defensive plan. Maybe it's an offensive plan.
One of the really interesting things that I have come to realize about the military is whenever they develop new technology and new weapons, it is classified as strengthening our defenses.
That's right. That's right.
And anybody that plays war games or sports will tell you the best form of defense, or the best defense, is a strong offense.
Right. Right.
So it really pretty much takes us back to where we got started, with the question, who came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah. Okay.
So are we going with is it a strong defense or is it a strong offense? What is it?
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of debate among my colleagues who are critical of deterrence. And I don't go quite as far as many of them do. But there are a number of people who feel that deterrence itself is a misrepresentation, that in fact those people who are the most vigorous arguers in favor of deterrence, what they're really arguing for is an offense. They're really trying to develop a situation whereby we could attack an enemy initially, not waiting to be attacked, not preventing them from attacking us, but that deterrence is a smokescreen under which we are seeking, and have been seeking for decades, to develop what's called a first strike capability.
Right.
And counterforce may be part of it. That maybe it's not defense at all.
Because
And of course,
let's look
it's
at a
not
stealth.
defense.
Let's look at a stealth bomber. A
Yeah.
stealth bomber, David. It is designed to be undetected.
Yes,
So-
that's right. That's right.
If I am going to retaliate to your attack, everybody already knows you're attacking. And you already know that I intend to retaliate to your attack. Why then do I need to be stealthy about it?
Well, again, I think you put your finger on something important. There are two reasons, I suppose, Kevin. One is, if you are in fact planning an initial attack, what we call a first strike,
Mm-hmm.
you would want to be stealthy. You would want to then sneak in there so that the other side's radar doesn't pick it up.
Right.
They don't know your planes are there. Unlike certain missiles, or most missiles, which can be picked up by radar. If you have a radar evading airplane that can go in there and literally bomb the hell out of another side before they even know you're there, that would make it all the all the easier, or make it all the more feasible for you to make a first attack and get away with it, perhaps.
Mm.
So that's a big problem with stealth weaponry, and you're absolutely right. The other argument for it, and it's maybe a little less sort of implies a little less nastiness on the part of the country in question. If you were a part of a bomber crew,
Mm-hmm.
you would just as soon not. This is your job, whatever it is, for better or worse. Your job is to fly these things around under certain circumstances.
Right.
You're not terribly eager to be flying something that's kind of a sitting duck.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
you
Right.
know, you're in the Air Force, you just as soon fly something that the other side can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an argument there too. I'm not claiming that everything the military does is intended to, for nefarious purposes. And in fact, I'm not anti-military necessarily. I'm against a lot of things the military does, for sure. And I'm certainly anti-nuclear, and I'm certainly anti-deterrence. And let me add one other thing, too, before we forget about it. And there's lots more problems with deterrence, by the way. But a huge problem that we haven't mentioned yet, although I kind of hinted at it, is deterrence really serves as the bulwark, the underlying public justification for nuclear weapons themselves. A
Mm-hmm.
country's not, we wouldn't get away with saying we're going to spend billions of dollars on nuclear weapons because we're planning to attack some other country first.
Right.
That probably wouldn't fly. But we say, well, it's for deterrence. It's to enhance our security, our safety. And deterrence is the justification. It's the excuse it's used.
Right.
And so part of my anger with deterrence is not only that it, I think, threatens us hugely, but I think it serves as it threatens us because of its illogicality and how it is counterproductive in so many ways. But in addition, it is the main bulwark for the whole nuclear weapons system. And if we could undo our belief in deterrence, I think that would help us go a long way toward undoing our reliance on nuclear weapons in the first place.
Right. Because if and I won't say that I am the guy to ask about this or to talk to about this, but wasn't the whole argument behind the atomic bomb after the atomic bomb to say that this is the tool to end the war?
Right. That's right. That's the argument that was used. But these arguments tend to change over time. It's just like when George W. Bush organized his invasion of Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, the justification was that they had weapons. Saddam had weapons of
Mass
mass
destruction.
destruction.
Yes.
Well, turned out that was bullshit, if you'll pardon the expression, and we knew then.
God bless you.
He didn't, and it was pretty well known by most people in the know, if you will,
Right.
that he didn't have nuclear weapons, didn't have them. But that was the excuse that was used. Then afterward, they said, well, the reason we did it was to bring democracy to the Middle East, or to liberate Iraq's women, or all sorts of after-the-fact justifications.
Right.
Well, you look at the Manhattan Project, when the U.S., zoomed ahead to produce nuclear weapons. The original justification, and in fact, it was considered legitimate by just about all the scientists who worked on it, was we worried that Germany was developing. And the notion of Hitler with nuclear weapons is not exactly a very pleasant idea.
Not at all.
So the idea was we got to beat them to it. Well, we did. Well, Germany surrendered in May. That didn't stop the Manhattan Project. They kept right on going. And then it was, of course, used against Japan. The claim that Truman used at the time, he went on radio afterward, he said, we have used this new and amazingly, unparalleled weapon of destruction against Hiroshima, a major military base. Well, that was absolutely made up out of the whole cloth. Hiroshima was not a military base. Not only wasn't it a major one, it wasn't a military base at all. Similarly with Nagasaki. In fact, by that time, U.S. bombers had complete air superiority over Japan. We bombed every place we wanted to, every city, often many times. There were just a handful that were left unbombed, and that was on purpose. If they were military targets, we would have bombed them. The reason Hiroshima and then Nagasaki were chosen is because they hadn't been bombed. They hadn't been bombed because they weren't strategic targets. And, they were chosen because they looked for a way to demonstrate the power of the atomic bomb by dropping it on innocent civilians. Then the question arises, well, but didn't that speed up the end of the war? Well, it's possible. It is possible. Actually, my dad was in the Canadian Army at the time, and he had come back from Europe and was being retrained, in fact, for a possible land invasion of Japan. And I hadn't been conceived yet. So it could well be, it's possible, that without the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I wouldn't be around because my dad might have been killed in the process of trying to overthrow Japan.
Right.
So it's possible. On the other hand, the strategic bombing survey that the U.S. Undertook after the war concluded that Japan was on its knees, was about to surrender. All they needed was our guarantee that we would let them keep the emperor. And had we just gone along with that, they would have surrendered. That they knew that the die was cast. They knew it was over. And that, in fact, what really brought the Japanese around to surrendering was not the atomic bombings, but the fact that the Soviet Union entered the war. The Soviet Union entered the war just about exactly the same day that we bombed Nagasaki. And then with the Soviet Union on their backs too, they knew darn well they didn't have a chance. And so it's entirely possible, I think it's likely, that the reason the U.S. went ahead and dropped those bombs was not the end of World War II. It was the beginning of the Cold War. It was a desire on the part of the Cold Warriors in the U.S. to essentially threaten Stalin and say, look what we got, so you better not try to push us around.
So let me assert my power, show my authority, kind of a deal. David, did I lose you? Hello?
Yeah, I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Oh, I was saying, it was just let me assert my power and show off my authority, my prowess, so to speak.
Okay, please do.
Well, that was the demo. That was the bombing.
I thought you were talking Kevin. I thought you were going to assert your authority.
Oh no. I'm saying
welcome
the bombing. The bombing. That's exactly what that was.
Yes, that's right. I'm going to show you what I got. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And that's going to scare you because after all, at that point, the Western powers were all demobilizing in Europe. They were really eager to end that tremendous military mobilization. But Stalin kept his conventional forces in Europe. And so, there probably was a legitimate fear, not a desire, not an urging, a need to end the war with Japan, because that was essentially over anyhow, but rather to keep Stalin frightened. Like you said, let me show you my power. Show him, listen, man, you may have the huge Red Army, but we've got nuclear weapons. Now, interestingly, what I do think it was a myth that nuclear weapons ended the war with Japan, and I think it was a useful myth, both for the Japanese and for the Americans. And here's why. And I think it's worth looking at that because it's continued as the notion that nuclear weapons are somehow the winning weapon. They're so potent. Look what they did. They ended the war with Japan. Well, the Japanese, again, almost certainly were about to surrender anyhow. Mm-hmm. And for them, it was really useful because it helped them salvage some pride. Because, it wasn't just the Americans that beat us. It was this weird, new, demonic weapon. And so they were perfectly content, indeed relieved, to be able to say, that's what did it, We didn't get beaten somehow in a fair fight. It was nuclear weapons that did it.
Right.
So that sort of salvaged their egos. And from the American perspective, it was at least as useful or more so, because it said, wow, yeah, we've got this winning weapon. It emphasized how useful nuclear weapons are and helped justify the whole nuclear weapons enterprise that got going, full steam ahead at the end of World War II.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Now, I looking at how war games are played, looking at how war is strategized and things of war, I have a tendency of doing this. I want to scale it down a little bit, and it wasn't where we had initially thought of going with this. But I want to scale it down a little bit and take it to a local sense. The whole idea of
Okay.
deterrence, if you will indulge me.
Sure. Go ahead.
So basically, it is deterrence as per definition, and I can read it here because I won't pretend that I know. I'll read it. The action of discouraging an action or event through instilling doubt or fear of the consequences, which is what we've been talking about all night.
Okay. Right.
Let's look at go back in time and the whole idea of the slave trade. So you have a handful of ships going to a country full of people, and yet still these people that came, the handful of people that came on these ships, managed to corral this whole nation into slavery, and this it has been happening from even before that, with the Greek and the Africans, Egyptians.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Spanish, lots of people were making slaves of each other.
Right.
That's true, but not to the extent that happened in the African slave, the black African slave trade.
Right.
Nothing really to that in the numbers. Yeah, you're right.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say they were quite effective at using deterrence.
Now, who's the they that you're talking about?
The enslavers. So the Portuguese were big in the slave trade. The Europeans were big in the slave trade. So what was it? Because take, for example, a plantation. You had the owner and the family, and they owned a ton of slaves. But the slaves wouldn't try to overthrow the house because of fear of retaliation.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, that was definitely a case where, in many circumstances, deterrence worked. But I guess I'd point out a couple things. Not least being, we're not talking about nuclear deterrence.
Right.
We're talking about
So I was scaling it down.
Flogged, being hanged, being torn limb from limb, being burned to death. These horrible things that were done.
Right.
But those were credible threats. They were horrible, unethical, immoral, despicable, disgusting things, but they did happen. And so they had credibility, in part because it wasn't a matter of blowing up the whole plantation. It was a matter of, you try to get away and you're going to be in deep trouble. And not only that, but I may kill your whole family. Now, those are horrible threats, but they're threats that, to a large extent, worked. You're absolutely right. On the other hand, let's also point out, Kevin, that didn't always work. I mean, there were slave rebellions.
Right.
Nat Turner in the United States, there was the very successful, the only really totally successful national slave rebellion in Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, the French were just horrible in Haiti.
Right.
They were despicable in what they did, but that didn't deter Toussaint Louverture and his followers and others.
Right.
They said, "The hell with you. We're not going to be slaves anymore." And they killed a lot of people. A lot of their people got killed, but they were free. So
Exactly.
So deterrence worked up to a point in some cases, but it did fail. And it failed even in the United States, finally, right?
Yeah.
Now, If the nuclear deterrence fails, that'd be a whole other ballgame.
Right.
I want to emphasize, I'm not opposed to all aspects of deterrence. I'm specifically opposed to nuclear deterrence. I mean, I'm certainly opposed to deterrence if it kept people, insofar as it keeps people enslaved, without a doubt. I mean, there are horribly immoral uses of deterrence. But let me give you an example here. I live on a horse farm about half an hour east of Seattle. We have 10 acres and a whole bunch of animals, including a lot of horses and dogs.
Right.
One of our dogs, in fact, I don't know if you saw that photo I sent you of me and our biggest dog.
Well, it's up right now.
Okay.
And for those who are looking, David is the one on the left. That's just so that everybody knows the image that I've been showing you all day. That's David, and that really cute creature. That's a dog.
Yeah. I'm considerably less appealing looking, without a doubt. So that dog, his name Candor. Iskander is his full name. He's what's called an Anatolian Shepherd, and he weighs about 150 pounds. And he was bred for really thousands of years in Anatolia, Turkey, to defend flocks of sheep and goats against wolves and bears. And the Turks claim, I don't know if this is really true, but they claim this breed is the only breed of dog where one individual can drive away a whole flock of wolves, a whole pack of wolves.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true, but seeing Candor in action sometimes against coyotes and bears, actually, it might be true. In any case, so when we walk around our property, we have 4 dogs, of which 3 of them are pretty big. They're not as big as Candor. The other 3 kind of stay with us as we're walking around. Candor walks around the edge, around the fence, just inside our fence, always. He was doing that ever since he was a little puppy. He's a deterrent. He's our natural, conventional deterrent. He keeps other critters from coming into our property. He loves us. He loves our immediate family, our other animals.
Right.
But he doesn't like any other 4-legged critter that comes in, and he kills them right away. Now, occasionally, he misfires. Sometimes he gets really pissed off when there's a coyote on the other side of the fence. We have a fairly sturdy electric fence going around. And if he's on one side and the coyote's on the other, and he can't get at the coyote, he gets really irritated. And sometimes briefly attack one of our other dogs just out of frustration. But it's a real problem for the dogs. But it helps the vet locally,
It keeps the business going.
Right. But, I really respect Candor. We love him. He serves a really valuable purpose. But we're not about to say, if someone comes onto our property who we don't want, we're going to blow up the property or blow up the neighborhood.
Right.
Conventional deterrence can be a good thing in many ways, and I think Candor is a really good thing. So it's not that all forms of deterrence are bad.
Right.
But certain forms really are, and nuclear deterrence, I think, really takes the cake. Because it's got so many problems built right into it. In addition to the fact that it's the major justification of nuclear weapons as a whole, it's got all this, it's not just illogical, but it's counterproductive. It produces situations that I honestly think are making nuclear war more likely rather than less. And, that's a pretty heavy weight for it to carry.
Right. David, let's look at some of the the formalities here. You are a professor there in Washington.
Yeah, actually, I was a professor of psychology at the University of Washington for 43 years. We try to get our students out in 4 years. If some of us are a little slow and we take a little longer.
Yeah, so you take 10 times as long and change. Almost 11
Right.
times.
You got it. So now I'm officially Professor Emeritus of Psychology. Yeah, I finally graduated. Yep.
Nice. And in conjunction with that, you are also an author.
Yeah, yeah. I've written a lot of books dealing with a variety of things.
Right.
Um, yeah. I'm sorry. I think I was interrupting you, Kevin.
No, no, I'm saying right, yeah. Take us just through a few of those before we touch on the latest one to be released.
Sure. Okay. I need to say, by the way, that it's now I'm on the West Coast. It's 8:25 my time, and I'm going to have to. I love you and I love your audience, but I'm going to have to stop in about 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
So yes, I've written about 30 books actually, which is probably too many. Um, a number of them have to do with nuclear weapons. I actually wrote the first textbook on nuclear weapons that was used at West Point and at the Air Force Academy for quite a while. I've written a number of sort of more popular books, if you will, not necessarily textbooks, about war and peace and weaponry. I'm also, my original training actually is as an evolutionary biologist, and so a number of my books have dealt with a rather different topic, namely applying evolutionary insights, evolutionary thinking to understanding human behavior better. And so a number of books have been concerned with that. The most recent one of those I called Through a Glass Brightly. It's kind of a play on words of the biblical through a glass darkly. The idea is that through a glass brightly, and the subtitle is using science to see our species as we really are.
Right.
That with the use of science, we can understand ourselves in ways that religion alone does not provide.
Right.
So yeah, those are just a few of the books that I've written, and I like writing. It's been a good gig, as they say.
Well, you get past 2 books, you got to like it. No, the one that you have coming up is called Threats.
Yeah, it's called Threats, and the subtitle is Intimidation and Its Discontents. It's a play on words of one of the famous books by Sigmund Freud, which was called, what was it called? Civilization. Pardon me. Yeah, that's what happens when you've graduated. Your brain gets a little old. It's called Civilization and Its Discontents, was Freud's book. This one is called Threats, Intimidation and Its Discontents. And what I look at in that book is the use of threats to intimidate another side, the other guy.
Right.
So I'm not looking, in this case, I'm not looking at asteroids, the threat of asteroids, or super volcanoes, or even the threats of pandemics or global warming. Not that I don't think those are really important. Obviously they are. But
Right.
I'm looking at the threats, the way people use them against other people. And about half of that deals with nuclear deterrence. The other half is other kinds of threats. For instance, just to give you an example, I think we mentioned briefly the use of the threat of capital punishment,
Right.
supposedly to keep people from being murderers. Well, that's a threat. It's a very prominent threat, and it absolutely fails. It does not work at all. And yet a lot of people in the U.S. particularly still believe in it. Another threat that I talk about in the book that I think is a fascinating topic is the threat of eternal damnation.
Yeah.
Religion uses threat of hell. It's not just Christianity that does. Islam does. Judaism not so much, but just about every other religion uses the threat of eternal punishment as an effort, a way, in some cases it works, to try to get people to walk the straight and narrow, to do what we want you to do,
Right.
whatever the we may be. So there's this threat. It's a pretty big threat, isn't it? The threat that you're going to suffer for eternity. horrible punishment. Whether that works or not, again, in most cases, it does. There's some evidence that it actually makes people behave a little more morally, but it also makes them a hell of a lot, if you pardon the expression, less happy.
Yeah.
So that's another threat. I also talk about the threat that many people in the United States, many people who are the sort of the Trumpists, felt in 2016 when they voted for that jerk, that they felt threatened. These are particularly, the white working class felt threatened by the way the country was going, threatened by darker skinned folks, threatened by the fact that they didn't have as much education as a number of other people. And so Trump appealed to their bigotry, to their fears. He was playing to their sense of being threatened.
Right.
So, there's a lot going on here in the world of threats.
Well, you know what? I'm going to need for you to come back so we can talk threats. And as a spin-off. No, seriously. Because and my Wednesday show is typically about how we interact on a personal level. Whether you name the relationship, married, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, cousins, teacher, student, you name it. How we relate. And these are the things that we often employ in our relationships. We use deterrence. We use threats. We use fear. And I really want you to come back and we can talk along the lines of threats and fears and how people use them to manipulate situations and relationships.
Yes, I would be happy to do that, Kevin. There's a lot of domestic abuse relies on threat, for sure. And it's sometimes, unfortunately, threat that is carried out and continues to be carried out.
And I don't know how you feel about the security forces or police officers and such, especially now with the current climate. But there's also that fear, the black community perception of police officers, of law enforcement versus the white community's perception of law enforcement and their experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think that's really, really, really important. I completely agree. And actually, Kevin, another thing that plays into it that I do talk about in the book, and I'd be happy to chat with you about sometime, is yet another important threat and response to threats, and the response that generates more threat, is the whole gun culture in the United States, which is in large part, I believe, a response to the fact that many people feel threatened. They get their guns, and as a result, they are more threatened because it's more likely those guns are going to be used in the home, as a matter of fact.
Right.
And even the question of police, for sure. When you have a population in the United States that's got more guns than people, at some level, you got to think that the police really are worried. I mean, some of the police really do feel threatened because all these people carrying around guns.
Right.
The result being that they wind up threatening the people they're supposed to be protecting and doing more than threatening them, but often killing them.
Right.
And they look at, the poor guy, he was just, he was picking up his cell phone or something, although they'll often go out of their way to plant a gun to make it look like they're killing him was legitimate. So you got these threats and counter threats and all the violence that it generates, domestically, in terms of police, all sorts. It's a big issue, and I'd be happy to come back sometime and talk about it.
Okay, so when you can go ahead and schedule out one of your Wednesdays, let me know so I can fix it.
Sounds like a plan, my friend. I've enjoyed this.
Not as much as I.
Well, so now your audience can go back, and talk about some really scary things, like, I don't know, how to plan a good dinner or something.
Yeah, that can be quite scary because you mess up that first meal that you have that special person coming over. That's it.
Yeah, that's right. Make or break. Yeah. All right, my man. I love you. Take care.
All right, much love, bro. Take care. We'll talk.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. David P. Barash. Look him up and do look for this book coming out this fall. It's called Threats, Intimidation, and Its Discontents. Listen, he'll be back. And we'll be talking some more, as you just heard me say. So don't feel bad, don't feel blue. There are more days of the night shift ahead of you. We'll be right back after a couple messages, and then we close out the night shift week with some musical therapy. Sound like a plan? I think so too. We'll be right back.
Pulse Media Group, innovative streaming and recording, has done it again. A new way to get your business in full view of your neighborhood consumer through AdShare TV. It's available in your neighborhood today. It's easy. Just call us 754-999-6020. Become a host today and place a TV monitor in a strategic location so it's easy to see. Get a 1-minute video ad or longer that plays anywhere in our network. Can't be a host? No problem. For a few dollars, we'll run your 30-second video ad. A host can run announcement specials like buy one get one free or discount ads. Let's turn your flyers into a 30-second video with music or a voiceover, or let us create and run your video ad with a spokesperson. Take advantage of our early enrollment discount. Join us today. Your ad will be seen at least 30 times per day in your AdShare TV neighborhood. It's easy. Just call us 754-999-6020. AdShare TV, part of Pulse Media Group.
Thompson.
I'm David Muir.
And we are the co-founders of a cultural nonprofit in Florida called Island Space.
For many reasons, now more than ever, we need the support of our communities.
As Caribbean Americans, we have the unique ability to claim everyone from the island as members of our Caribbean American family.
We are working to create a home for that family.
The Island Archives will become an internationally recognized museum of history.
Visitors can learn that although we are unique, we are truly stronger together.
Learn more at islandspacefl.org.
It takes an entire village to raise a child. Hello, I'm Paul Campbell, here to talk about Palace. Peace and Love Academic Scholarship. This nonprofit group supports students facing serious obstacles from entering or continuing their studies, not because the grades are failing, but due to the lack of financial support.
Over the past 8 years, Palace has awarded 600 scholarships valued at approximately 50.3 million Jamaican dollars, or 415,000 US dollars.
Together, we must build a better future for our children. Please visit www.palace1.org and make your donation to brighten the future of a deserving child. Palace, preserving young minds for posterity.
It's Christina representing for DJ Kevin. You see me, I say, I don't know the boss. You see me, I say, DJ Kevin's Stew and the night shift radio show. Yo, the thing, turn up the thing loud. Whoa, DJ Kevin's Stew at the heart of a champion. Never underestimate, just choose him. The silver line behind the dark clouds. DJ Kevin's Stew believe him, and that's no doubt. Salute the Night Shift Radio Show, Christine. This is
I'd like to take a solemn moment to introduce this song. So many of us have been affected one way or another by the unnecessary gun and knife crime killings which have been escalating within the UK, throughout the Caribbean, including Jamaica, USA and many other nations. When I first heard this song by New Direction, it was around the time that sadly another one of our young 14-year-old boys had his life taken from him in London. My brother Pablo and I both know the grieving grandmother of this young child. It was at that point when it dropped in my spirit to record this version, so I approached all the featured artists on this album project if they would kindly contribute to this recording in special awareness to help fight this crime epidemic. GLR Records will offer all proceeds from this single to help this very serious situation as a result of these unnecessary and shameful crimes within our communities. It is written in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. A heartfelt thank you from Gary Revelation Dixon on behalf of TTM Collective Orchestra and all the featured artists. Please share this message of love, and I will challenge and leave you with this. If we all did one encouraging assignment in our area to help put an end to these mindless killings, what would you do? Hallelujah!
The sound of the TTM Collective. From the album Masterpiece. Well, inspirational love songs. Masterpiece. The track is called Heal the Land. Their collaborative work.
In
praise him even though my bills are way overdue.
This is the sound of Tamara B.
Praise him even though I don't know what I'm gonna do. And even when I find my back against the wall with nowhere to turn, I'll lift my head up high and say, solid rock is where I will stand. So I know you got me covered. Thank you. Stormy seas at times I'll be, there's no need to worry. 'Cause your ultimate captain is always there to deliver me. Stop me from giving my praise. And even when the door is closed, Jah got the keys in his hands. I'll stand firm in my faith. He will make everything straight. Jah, I know you got me covered. Thank you.
Downtown, enough trenches, everywhere you look and everywhere you turn, zinc fences. Kids don't know they can do better. Play trends.
This is Barash.
They never know that they could have been doctor, all grow up to be the finest actor. Cause the system never created no structure.
Invitation to downtown.
The one deeper underground. We never see a politician when we want to. Can't even get you on the phone to talk to. After we regulate a thing and support you, don't tell me that this is what it boils down to. You should have lived in the era that the water should do. Suffer everything where everybody go through. Curfew, water fresh in the canal too. Yeah, and see how well you can do. Yeah. Boy. Nobody is safe or sound when night falls. Everywhere you look and everywhere you turn, streets empty. Every house is saying a prayer. Tomorrow will be better. Where the kids can go out in the park and they can play until dark comes. No need to worry cause they know they're not alone. Don't need security to take them home. This is just a glimpse of what downtown goes through. Tell me now, what can you do? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Invitation to downtown.
This is Hezron.
Be careful how you play the game. The cards are never enough.
Life is a poker game.
Life is a poker game. Game of chance.
I remember when Hezron was writing this song.
Be careful how you play the game. The cards are never enough. Tell me, Father, is there something you done wrong in the past? Why this love of mine so hard? Man, I've
This is Inner Circle working out with Lunch Money Lewis, Alex from TOK, and King Charles. It's called We're Dancing.
We're dancing all night. DJ out there, rock the music, rock you all night. Yeah, me and my girl till daylight.
Feel the music and let the people them lose it. Yeah, if you're rocking in the club, you gotta show me love. I know that it gets hard sometimes. Yeah. Feel the music and them do this song. And let the people them choose it. You know yeah. When you're rocking to the beat, just put it on repeat. I know that it gets hard sometimes.
I was split fun, drink and cool out. Y'all love, I don't know what you about. Don't leave, you want me to stay. Sorry, babe, but you know I gotta go now. I gotta go and ease my mind. I never wanna waste your time. But the only thing I know for sure, one day that the sun gon' shine. Yeah. All night, all night, all night, all day. Yeah. All night, all night, all night, all day. I was split fun, drink and cool out. Y'all love, I don't know what you about. No squares in a circle, no curfew.
We dancing all night. Got to be alright. Got to make the music rock you all night. We will fight till daylight. Take no circle because we come to nice it up. And when them stand and drop them off, we wheel and pull up. And when the girls them there, and they say we stand up. And when them start to dance, you know the place just back up. We dancing all night. Got to be alright. Got to make the music rock you all night. We will fight till daylight. We dancing all night. DJ out there, rock the music rock you all night. Me and my girl till daylight.
Who's done it? Yeah.
This is Ed Robinson. It's called The More We Are Together.
They say it takes love to make the world go round.
Yes, it does.
Even though we know it takes hate to make it all tumble down.
To the ground.
We know that what goes up don't always come back down. No, but when it goes around, we know it's have to come back around. So if you're digging one pit, my brother, better you just dig two. And if you're setting one trap, my sister, set another one for you. Don't you know things are always never what they seem.
Want to thank you each and everyone for tuning in this week.
It could sometimes be your dream.
It continues on Monday.
Oh, we are together.
And I have another surprise, another treat. So, listening to the Rodney Reed case, you hear some names being mentioned, and one of them was an officer by the name of Ed Salmala. He's the officer who allegedly committed suicide with a gun that he had turned in the day before.
Instead of building walls,
Yeah, him.
build bridges instead.
His brother will be joining us on Monday for community and finance.
Let peace go ahead. Remember today is for you.
So be sure to join us for that one.
For me. The light
Until then, do look out for members of your community. Wear your mask.
to see. Things are always
And your community is not just the development that you live in, it spreads far and wide. So be nice on the internet.
could sometimes
The people you pass on the bus, on the plane, on the boat, on the train, granted they're running, these are members of your community.
happier we shall be.
If you don't need to go anywhere and use those methods of transportation, please stay home.
Shall be
As we say, Tana your yard.
together. Happier
But do something good for somebody today, because you never know who's going to do something good for you tomorrow.
the stronger we shall
My name is DJ Kevin Steele. This is how I like to do it to you, for you, and with you. Every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern time. Call a friend, tell a friend. KevinSteele.com is the website. Easily accessible.
Stand up tall. Yes, the more we are together, the happier we shall be. The more we stand together.
I have one more for you. Not the Ed and Dotty like I played last night.
The more we are together, the happier we shall
But we're closing off the way we started out. This is the sound of Miss Shauna Dazzle. It's called Glorious. The latest single from her. Shauna is a member of SDS, Sensational Dynamic Sound. That dynamic trio out of South Florida. Shauna Dazzle, Suzanne Sultry, and Dotty.
Mercy's pouring down like rain, and I'm flooded by grace. And not because of any good I've done, His love remains the same.
It's called Glorious.
Hey, the whole world see the light.
And I'll leave you with this one. Y'all take care of yourself until we meet again. Be good. But if you can't be good at it. Y'all take care now.
I cannot believe your name. I cannot but give you praise. I know where I could be now, so I stand unashamed. God, you've never let me down in spite of even me. And you prove yourself faithful. You reign in majesty, so I sing, may the whole world see the light. May they come to testify. May they know the power and might of your glorious name. May the whole world see the light. May they come to testify. May they know the power and might of your glorious name. Whoa, whoa, got my list, cannot remember how you saved my son and protected my unborn child from the bullets of the gun. Remember how you gave me faith when my strength was less than great. You know, God, you were never late. God, I know you're on my side. You have shown up every time, my God. So I had to bend this tune, 'cause where would I be without you? Hey, hey, the whole world see the light. May they come to testify. May they know the power and might of your glorious name. Oh, may the whole world see the light. May they come to testify. May they know the power and might of your glorious, glorious, glorious. May the whole world see the light. May they come to testify. May they know the power and might of your glorious name. Oh, may the whole world see the light. May they come to testify. And may they know the power and might of your glorious name. Whoa, whoa, whoa,
Greetings and salutations, one and all. You're invited to tune in to the night shift with DJ Kevin Steele. It airs on Mondays with Community and Finance, Tuesdays with Healthy Love, and Wednesdays with Real Talk. from 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Come spend some time interacting in the stew pot where we keep things bubbling and wind down in musical therapy. The Night Shift with DJ Kevin Stew is on kevinstew.com, where you're encouraged to have acceptance through enlightenment.